On August 1, 2025, President Donald Trump stunned global markets by signing an executive order that raised tariffs on Canadian goods from 25% to a staggering 35%. The announcement, made in a dramatic outdoor ceremony, sent shockwaves through financial centers from New York to Toronto and left business leaders scrambling to assess the fallout. This sweeping action targeted over 70 countries. But for Canada, it felt like a direct assault on one of the world's closest and most integrated economic partnerships. The two nations shared not just a border, but deeply intertwined supply chains and millions of jobs that depend on smooth cross-border trade. The move marked a sharp escalation from earlier tariffs, which had already strained industries and chilled cross-border commerce. Factories that once hummed with activity now faced uncertainty, and shipping companies braced for delays and increased costs. The new 35% levy, effective immediately, was designed to maximize pressure on Canadian exporters. It also included a 40% transshipment penalty, a harsh measure intended to block any attempts to reroute goods through third countries and close potential loopholes. The White House insisted this was not a negotiation tactic, but a punitive measure for what it called Canadian stubbornness on key issues, including trade imbalances and regulatory disagreements. Officials emphasized that the administration was prepared to escalate further if Canada did not comply. For Canadians, the news was a gut punch, threatening jobs from Windsor's auto plants to BC's lumber mills, and casting a shadow over communities that rely on exports to the U.S. workers and business owners alike, worried about layoffs, plant closures, and the ripple effects across the economy. The timing was pointed, coming just after the U.S. Commerce Secretary had hinted at possible détente if Canada backed down. Instead, the administration doubled down, making it clear that compromise was off the table for now. Instead, Trump's order signaled the end of friendly persuasion and the start of a new, more volatile era in Canada-U.S. relations. Protests erupted at border crossings, and both governments braced for a prolonged standoff. The message was clear. The U.S. was prepared to use its economic might to force Canada's hand, regardless of the diplomatic fallout or the impact on ordinary citizens. The stage was set for a confrontation with profound consequences for both nations, as leaders on both sides weighed their next moves in a rapidly escalating trade war. The White House justified the new tariffs by blaming Canada for failing to stop fentanyl trafficking into the U.S., a claim designed to tap into American anxieties about the opioid crisis, which has devastated communities across the country. By pointing the finger at a foreign neighbor, the administration sought to rally domestic support and deflect attention from the complexities of the crisis at home. The narrative was simple, direct, and emotionally charged. Canada was being cast as a weak link in the fight against a deadly epidemic. But President Trump quickly revealed a second, more strategic motive: retaliation for Canada's recent recognition of Palestinian statehood. This move by Ottawa had angered Washington, and the tariffs became a tool for expressing that displeasure, sending a clear message about the costs of diverging from U.S. foreign policy priorities. On social media, Trump made it unmistakably clear. Trade policy and foreign policy were now linked, and allies who strayed from the U.S. line would pay a price. His posts were blunt, amplifying the administration's stance and leaving little room for diplomatic ambiguity. This dual rationale put Ottawa in a bind, forcing it to fight on two fronts: public health and international diplomacy. Canadian leaders suddenly found themselves having to defend their domestic policies while also navigating a rapidly shifting global landscape. The fentanyl accusation, though questionable and lacking clear evidence, was emotionally charged and hard to counter in the public eye. The opioid crisis is a deeply personal issue for many Americans, making it a powerful tool for political leverage. The Palestine issue, meanwhile, was a blunt assertion of power politics. Canada's foreign policy independence was suddenly in question. The message was unmistakable. Even close allies could face consequences for charting their own course on the world stage. For Canadian officials, the challenge was daunting. Defend against a moralized drug crisis and a diplomatic power play, both at once. The stakes were high, and every move was scrutinized by both domestic and international audiences. The administration's approach was clear. Any tool, from public health to geopolitics, could be weaponized to enforce its agenda. The lines between economic policy and international relations were blurring, creating new risks for countries caught in the crossfire. The result? A fundamental shift in the Canada-US relationship, with trade and diplomacy now inseparable. What had once been a stable partnership was now subject to the unpredictable tides of political calculation. Canada faced a new reality, where dissent could mean economic punishment, and every policy decision carried the risk of triggering a broader confrontation with its most powerful neighbor. Ottawa responded swiftly, taking immediate and decisive action to address the concerns raised by the U.S. government, with Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly rejecting the U.S. claims, stating that the accusations were unfounded and not based on solid evidence. He cited data showing only 1% of seized U.S. fentanyl originated in Canada, dismantling the premise that Canada was a primary source. This data was backed by extensive research and collaboration with international agencies. Carney highlighted Canada's ongoing investments in border security, thousands of new officers, upgraded surveillance and state-of-the-art technology to monitor and secure the border, and tougher laws targeting traffickers. These measures were designed to disrupt and dismantle criminal networks operating across the border. These weren't last-minute fixes, but part of a long-term strategy to secure the border and fight organized crime. The government had been working on these initiatives for years, ensuring a robust and comprehensive approach. The government's message: Canada is a proactive, reliable partner, not the weak link portrayed by Washington. This partnership was crucial for the safety and security of both nations. By focusing on facts and concrete actions, Ottawa aimed to reframe the debate and reassure both Canadians and Americans. The emphasis was on transparency and accountability. The goal was to show partnership and shared responsibility, not blame. This collaborative approach was essential for addressing the complex issues at the border. Canada's calm, fact-based diplomacy stood in stark contrast to the heated rhetoric from the South. This measured response was intended to de-escalate tensions and promote mutual understanding. The stakes were high, reclaiming the narrative and defending national reputation. Canada was determined to maintain its integrity and continue being a trusted ally. The 35% tariff hit Canada's core industries hard. Lumber, steel and aluminum, already battered by previous tariffs, now faced existential threats, putting thousands of jobs at risk. The auto sector, the heart of Ontario's economy, was squeezed by separate 25% tariffs, disrupting the tightly integrated North American supply chain. With 75% of Canadian exports bound for the U.S., the country's economic vulnerability was laid bare. The tariffs acted as a tax, making Canadian goods less competitive and threatening businesses large and small. For many, this was no longer an abstract policy fight, it was a kitchen table crisis. The economic battlefield had come home, forcing a reckoning with Canada's dependence on its southern neighbor. The need for a new strategy was urgent. Instead of retaliating, Canada chose resilience. Prime Minister Carney announced a focus on protecting jobs and supporting affected industries, rolling out aid packages, loan guarantees, and retraining programs. The government launched a Buy Canadian campaign, urging consumers and businesses to prioritize domestic products. Ottawa also reviewed federal procurement to favor Canadian suppliers, aiming to build a more self-reliant economy. This approach signaled maturity and avoided escalating the conflict while acknowledging Canada's limited leverage in a tariff war. By not retaliating, Canada claimed the diplomatic high ground and focused on long-term economic strength. The message: shield workers, foster economic patriotism, and build resilience from within. The goal was clear: weather the storm and emerge stronger. The Buy Canadian push was more than a slogan, it was a strategic overhaul. For years, internal trade barriers made it easier to sell to the U.S. than across provinces. Now, Ottawa and the provinces moved to harmonize regulations, creating a seamless national market. The aim: make Canadian businesses less dependent on U.S. demand and more competitive at home. Supermarkets, manufacturers, and consumers were all called to support local producers and rethink their purchasing habits. The campaign sought to turn economic necessity into national pride. By reducing internal friction, Canada hoped to build a more resilient economy, better able to withstand external shocks. The vision: a Canada where Halifax and Vancouver are as connected as Boston and Toronto. Alongside internal reforms, Canada announced a new wave of nation-building projects. Echoing the spirit of the Transcontinental Railway, the government planned major infrastructure and industrial investments to drive long-term growth. Projects ranged from new energy corridors to high-tech manufacturing and digital infrastructure. The goal: create jobs now and boost productivity for decades. Public, private, and indigenous partnerships would ensure broad benefits and shared prosperity. This was a bold statement. Canada would invest in its own future, not wait for external approval. The message: national unity, strategic investment, and self-sufficiency are the path forward. In the face of U.S. protectionism, Canada's answer was ambition and unity. Even as Canada pivoted inward, it kept the door open to talks with Washington. The economic ties run too deep for a full break, so negotiation remained essential. But talks were fraught. Canada was bargaining under pressure, with tariffs as leverage. Conceding too much risked future demands. Standing firm meant prolonged pain for workers and industries. U.S. officials framed the dispute in personal and political terms, complicating any search for common ground. Both leaders faced domestic pressure to stand strong, making compromise elusive. The challenge: find a solution that lets both sides claim victory, even as the economic clock ticks. The outcome would shape the future of North American trade. While diplomacy played out, a parallel battle raged in U.S. courts. Trump's authority to impose sweeping tariffs faced legal challenges from importers in several states. A court ruling could overturn the tariffs, offering a way out that bypasses tough negotiations. Globally, the tariffs were part of a broader American strategy, sending shockwaves through world markets and raising fears of recession. For Canada, the pain was immediate, but the benefits of resilience and nation-building would take years to materialize. The crisis forced a fundamental rethink of Canada's economic strategy, and its relationship with the U.S. trust and goodwill were eroding, and the old order was gone. The future would be shaped by negotiation, legal battles, and a new focus on self-reliance. Whatever the outcome, the events of 2025 marked a turning point. Canada-U.S. relations would never be the same.